Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Future of Jewish podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Hoffman. On this episode, I am joined by Nikki Schreiber. Following her father's sudden passing in 2013, she decided to do something in his memory. So she created an Instagram account called Humans of Judaism, which shares remarkable stories of Jews from across the world. Enjoy my conversation with Nikki Schreiber. Nikki, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. You and I, we were just talking offline, are kind of cut from the same cloth in certain ways, certainly on the new media side and how we connect Judaism and the Jewish world to the new forms of media. But before we get into what you're doing today with Humans of Judaism and some of the other great work that you've done, why don't you take us back to the early days, where you're from, where you grew up, a little bit of your background before we talk about what you're up to today.
Certainly. And like you said, offline, we definitely connected on being very passion driven in our work. And I thank you so much for having me here today. So I'm really excited to speak with you. Let's see, I'll take you back. I am American, born and raised in the New York area. And, I didn't necessarily intend to get started with a social media page. It sort of happened upon me. It's just interesting how it got started. So in about, I'd say 3 weeks or so, I'm coming up on the 8-year anniversary. So I'm going to take you all the way back to November of 2013, when I actually lost my father suddenly. And obviously it was tremendous. And the year of mourning also has you sort of really, just to yourself and things. And, so my siblings were ramping up and doing things in my father's memory. And at a certain point, I realized I had an idea. June 8th, 2014. I started a page on Instagram called Humans of Judaism. Really did not have any expectations. It honestly was something just to throw at the wall, see if it sticks, and really just to do a bit of something in my father's memory. And the intention really was to bring, some positive Jewish content to social media, which at the time was an interesting environment and certainly not where we are today. So in June of 2014, that actually coincided with Gilad Ayal and Naftali's disappearance and death. And it was a real summer that was very emotional. And I think people were looking to connect with some chizuk, some strengthening content, something to just support that unity energy that we were sharing that summer with, while we were grieving the loss. So by the end of the summer, Humans of Judaism, which was really just sharing some positive posts and different touching upon those sentiments. By the end of the summer, it already had 10,000 followers. And this was so many years ago. So it was really something spectacular. And that's when I realized that this is a little bit more than I expected. And come November, which was, the first yahrzeit, I was like, okay, now what? I just ended up keeping it going. And over the course of the last several years, there have been such incredible moments and experiences. Certainly the work and messaging has to evolve and adapt with the times. It's continues to be a very interesting ride, and especially at a time right now where I think people are looking for that. They continue to look for that positive, solid, feel-good content that I strive to deliver.
So I think that's, it's first of all, the fact that you were able to commemorate your father's memory in this way is nothing short of phenomenal. I want to go back before that, though. Take us back to the early days of Nikki Schreiber's life. I mean, I guess what I want to know personally is, like, you know, people unfortunately lose their parents all the time. Not everyone
Mhm.
starts effectively an Instagram account that then turns into sort of this digital movement that you've created over the last 8 years or so. I mean, there's a pretty big gap there. So take us back to, what was Judaism like for you growing up, and how did that also play a role in sort of creating Humans in Judaism? What was your Jewish upbringing like, and what are your Jewish experiences that you can share with us that also played a part in creating this movement?
Sure. I actually feel like I skipped the first chapter, so we're gonna like pull one of those prequel second follow-up movies to my story. Um, but giving you a bit of my own background, I feel really grateful to have grown up in a very warm home and environment that really celebrated and embraced our customs and traditions. I always say the page is in memory of my father, but it's really in great support of my mother. And I feel so lucky to have, two parents who really taught this organic and authentic, just enjoyment of our stories, of our culture, of our traditions, and all of it. So the chapter that I skipped actually was, if I go back about 18 months or so, I want to say a year to 18 months prior to my father's passing, I unfortunately experienced a different tragedy. A friend of mine, very young, just, passed away suddenly also. And in his memory, people were just in such utter shock. And he was somebody who really was a great member of the community. So it was a community loss. He was one of these guys who was like, volunteer on like Hatzalah and like, worked with kids with cancer, and just a really special soul that there was a real community loss in addition to the personal loss. So there was a movement started in an effort to do something in his memory to pay it forward. And so what ended up resulting, for me was I created this page in his memory called Daily Spark, which has been readapted to Sparks of Judaism, because sort of moved around that of Judaism. And so what it was just an intention to have a short bite of Torah or proverb or some positive insight that people can see something positive kicking off into their news feed. I call social media short attention span theater. And you'll notice that a lot in Humans. I really appreciate character limits, believe it or not. I'm one of the few, because I like to keep it short and sweet, just get straight to it without too much editorial, frankly, and just, serve that meat and potatoes. So I had this page, and my father was this, really accomplished and well-respected cantor. And he he had such a wonderful voice. I mean, I feel like people best know him as a cantor, but he also in his professional life was an absolutely well-respected, accomplished professional in his field, but most people really remember him as his cantor. And he was really a man of the Torah. So whenever I brought him any of these little, bits of Torah that I was going to post in memory of my friend on Facebook, he and I would connect on it, father and daughter. It was nice. He would, give me little tidbits or, oh, here, you might find this interesting or whatever it was. And it was very modest, this Daily Spark. I mean, there must have been 2,000 followers, and most of them were pretty much, me like calling people like, please, please, please follow my page. It was, it was back in like really old days. Like I just wanted to put something out there, and I was hoping someone would listen. And it was a really wonderful space. And then the interesting thing was when my father passed away and we met with the family rabbi and we were sitting down learning what these rules are of Shiva, was, one of the things he said is you can't learn Torah during the week of Shiva. I never knew this. I don't, you can't learn Torah. And I'm like thinking like, oh my God, me of all people, like it makes me seem like I don't even know what, like that this is a thing for me. But I was like, oh my God, I can't learn Torah this week. I can't post on Sparks. I can't post on Daily Spark. And so as time passed, when I was thinking of what to do for my father, I knew that I didn't want to piggyback on another memorial. I wanted to create something new for my father, since we really bonded more recently and closely to his death on this other page. It just, that's the missing piece from the beginning of my story. That's really what, connected this daughter and father to this love of Judaism and the authentic interest in not trying to speak and hear my own voice, but put out there things that will resonate. It's the level of Judaism that everyone can connect with. You don't even have to be Jewish. That's the whole purpose of the page, is to bring you in. It's not a secret. It's a warm invitation to our table. I think for all of us. That really is what got me to connect the piece. And with each milestone, as the page succeeded, and there were opportunities that were just beyond my wildest dreams, it allowed me to participate in charity events and meet different people, and all in my father's memory. It's just been so wild to think of what can be done. And when it comes around to, I actually consider he has two anniversary dates for his memorial, one on the day he passed away and one on the day the page was founded, because it's such a reach. And when people send their well wishes, and that the neshama should have an aliyah, the soul should go up, and just all these wonderful things, and all these different blessings, I read each one of them. I think it's so major, and it just really warms my heart. And that goes back to the very beginning of our conversation. That's why I'm so passionate about what I do. It's important to me.
Absolutely. I'm curious to know if you had the opportunity to sit with your father right now and go through the Facebook page or the Instagram account, or the website that you've created, what do you think he would say? What would be his reaction to the extent that you know him?
Okay, so I'm going to preface this. I am his first daughter. He held me in very high regard. Everything I did is just amazing. But there have been moments that are so, like, different people or engagement that's happened, or people I've met that are meaningful to us, that are important. I just sort of feel like it's a kiss on the forehead. But the thought of us sitting down and looking at the page and thinking about its successes, just from what it's reached, from, I just know he just would say that, I can't get emotional because it's totally whatever, but he would just be very proud. So I'll leave it there. But he really would just, I don't even know the words, because he'd just be so, so, so proud, for sure. Because it's pretty wild. And the more times are changing, the harder it is to really sit and celebrate and enjoy and embrace our heritage and our Judaism. And I find, and so just that alone, and seeing it still just be so well received, I think he'd be really proud of that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I want to also, talk about, you said that during the Shiva, after your father's passing, that you learned about sort of the rules, the laws of Shiva, that you didn't know before, which is kind of, it's probably a good thing that you didn't know them before, because you didn't really have to encounter
Exactly.
that, I hope. But I'm just curious to know, like, with that same line of thought, what are some of the things that you've learned about Judaism, about the Jewish people, about Jewish history since the founding of Humans in Judaism that you didn't really know before?
So it's interesting, because you encounter so many different types of Jews with different stories. The page is really just a reflection of what comes my way, what I come across. And, when I started off, I remember thinking, I love Israel. How could I not? And I love history, family stories. I think one of the best things is, if you've ever been a guest at a Shabbos table, it's always nice to catch up, see different different traditions and hear different things. I enjoy it so much. I soak it in. It's like real life documentary, everybody. It's, you know, you sit down and soak it up. And, you know, it's just, it's been very interesting and seeing the response, and how important certain stories and history and information and learning and explanation, how much it means to people who may not know that are Jewish, people who are not Jewish that are yearning to learn more about our culture authentically, and just a lot of appreciation for telling stories, especially at a time that people are trying to erase some of our history or rewrite some of our history. And here we have living testimony and living, you know, generations that it's the gem in their crown is where they're from and their survival of their family members. And telling the story is really, it's very humbling to have that opportunity. So I think that's the biggest takeaway.
And on the flip side, what's something that you thought going into creating Humans of Judaism that maybe today, or, you know, I know it's been 8 years now, but sort of after you created it or after it got its first big push, you no longer believe to be true?
It's such an interesting period of time. The cultural shift, the change in tone, content, so many things on social media, etc. You know, I came in sort of, like I said, you know, Humans of Judaism is very reflective of what I see and what comes in. The initial reflection was reflective of how I got started and what I knew. And as the page evolved, I really made a great conscious effort to evolve with it. Make sure to stay apolitical. Make sure to speak a bit more English than I speak. Like I'll say, you know, have a good Shabbos. But, you know, I would like to keep it more universal because I really, really strive to make it an open environment for all. And it's been interesting. And to answer your question, when I started, it was light and fluffy. And if I'd see somebody Jewish on a game show, it would make it on the page. If I saw, you know, if it was a celebrity's birthday, it would make it on the page. I was actually just looking through my old content recently. I go back so many times and just sort of, you know, take a look. And it's just so interesting how it's still a similar tone, but it's just a lot, you know, there's a lot more consciousness of mind to make sure that there's real purpose with each post, and to be sensitive to all as best you can, while really just being very proud to share our traditions, heritage, and stories.
Yeah, talk to us a little bit more about sort of this balance that is certainly hard to create between, you know, I'm just looking at the page right now on Instagram, and I think you've done such a phenomenal job of creating this balance between history and modern day, between sort of the sad parts of what it means to be Jewish and Judaism in terms of our history, obviously the Holocaust, but not only, and also the positive, you know, reflections on our people and our heritage. You know, a lot of stuff comes from Israel, a lot of stuff is from places around the world. I think you've done such a marvelous job, really, of creating this very hard balance. And you mentioned the word apolitical, which I'm sure also, especially things around Israel, probably can be challenging at times. Do you have like a sort of methodology that you sort of systematize how you post certain stories? Is it more just heartfelt? Like, take us through that sort of decision-making process through it all.
Certainly. So the good news is experience. I've been doing this for many years, and I love to learn. I'm very comfortable with if a post doesn't do well, reevaluating it, eyeballing things. I'm very analytical by nature. So for me, it's really trying to pay attention to what people are receiving. It's not what I want to put out there. So, and I also always say this is absolutely one of the worst models, but one of the things that I do is I don't really have my content prepared ahead of the week or that kind of thing. I find that every day is so unique and different, and you kind of ebb and flow with what's going on. Sometimes I'll have things that are prepared and, date centric, like on this day or something that happened. But I really try to be sensitive. So much happens in a day around the world. It's just been very, that's a new skill that you have to maintain to, and keep up with. So that's, I try really hard to pay attention to that.
It's interesting too, because obviously being an American and Jew, as you said, it feels right now that there's this power struggle between Israeli Jews and what I'll call American Jews, just based on sheer population numbers. I mean, there's Jews that live across the world, Australia, South Africa, across Europe, South America, Central America, parts of Asia. But it just feels, because we have effectively the two biggest populations of Jews in Israel and then in the States, it feels like there's a power struggle happening right now. And I'm just curious, from you sitting in the States right now as an American Jew and writing this tremendous Jewish content page, do you feel that struggle? Do you get comments from people that suggest one way or another that there's struggles happening? How do you sort of perceive the dynamic right now between Israeli Jews and American Jews and the rest of the Jewish world?
So I'm going to answer a bit of the last question to start to answer this question. Something that I actually left out is I try to also think ahead of my content and not, one dimensionally. I really try to think several steps ahead, and so often also, if I'm not presenting specifically provocative content, that's driven, very often there's media content that's provocative and choosing you to side certain ways or present certain opinions. It definitely starts there with that consciousness, and because the interest is definitely love different points of view, that's for certain. But I'm not looking for hostility or debate. It's meant, there's so much of that on every other page and different conversations that I really try to maintain the page, the tone. You have to somewhat direct people, help them, guide them into, the conversations. So I think that's also been a success. And between American Jews and Israeli Jews, I find us just to be hilarious siblings that, we certainly love to critique each other because, we've got to make sure our family looks good out there, but ultimately we always come together and give each other a hug when we see each other. So it's not, I find a lot of unity on the page. I really do. But again, it goes back to the content direction. And that's where we can, it's a nice mutual territory, and a common ground that I enjoy so much. Because one of the things that I do love to share, that I really just more and more, is Israel history. It's facts about Israel. It's the details that people may be asking themselves. People may not have a wide education on Israel's history and want to know more. So it's important that you just put out answers and facts and things, and that's really what I'm trying to do. So I think that's where we all meet together on that.
The word education is a clear buzzword. It's been a buzzword in the Jewish world for a while now. Education has actually been a key cornerstone. If you go, look throughout Jewish history, education has always been one of the primary pillars of our people and our heritage. I'm glad you brought that up, because when I look at humans of Judaism, I say this is everything that's right with Jewish education. In a world where Jewish education to me is, I don't want to call anyone out or isolate or badmouth Lashon Hara, but I'm underwhelmed by the quality and the pervasiveness of Jewish education. Israel, obviously, as a Jewish country, has its own education system, so I'm going to leave that part of the equation out of it for now. But I'm just curious, like, to me, what you're doing for Jewish education is better than 99% of the efforts. And we're talking billions with a B of dollars that have been invested in Jewish education over just the last 10, 20, 30 years. You basically start this in a very grassroots way. And I'm just, to me, that's like such a fascinating observation here, that in many communities around the world have financial issues, right? If they had more money, they would do better things. The Jews don't have financial issues. We have more money than we know what to do with. I'm just curious, like, how you look at the education piece and your contribution to Jewish education. I just want people to know, like, from my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, you did not come from like deep pockets, somebody saying, hey, I'm going to pay you, $5 million a year to run this tremendous, social media driven platform. You basically started this, from my understanding, with your own money, your own sort of relatively modest means, and you're doing as well from a sort of effectiveness or sort of a results driven standpoint as anyone in the Jewish world, despite them having seemingly limitless resources and you having quite limited ones. What do you make of that sort of analysis?
Well, I feel like I'm a backwards story of how people get started when they start a social media page. It's certainly very popularity driven, which makes sense because you don't want to make a page just to talk to yourself. So the whole purpose is to get messaging out there. Whereas my purpose was really not motivated by popularity or making it a career, a full-time job and other responsibilities. It was just genuinely motivated and driven by its work. I think that's where I connect with the people who follow the page the most, is they can feel that authenticity. I more often than not don't I turn down opportunities. I don't want this page to be a marketing platform and looking like I have some other agenda than my authentic agenda, which is really simply just to share these educational, moments in history and people, in different people's family history, which is our history, and just piecing it together in an environment that is just not typically filled with that type of content. So I'm just trying to really fill that gap.
I'm curious to know from you. I mean, there's got to be people listening to this podcast and following you on social media that are sort of the next Nikki Schreibers, right? And what would be your
Oh
advice
boy.
to sort of those people? I mean, just based on how you built Humans of Judaism, what are some of the things that you can look back and say, here are some things I did really well, and here's what I can pass on, and here's some of the things that if I would have known I could have done better. What kind of advice would you give to sort of the next Nikki Schreibers of the world in the Jewish world?
Oh, okay. Well, the next creators of the world for sure. I would love to give advice, and I often speak to different people at different stages within their journey. And, you know, I say a lot of the same things, so I'll regurgitate them. I always say that a post is a recipe with three ingredients, which is good content, uh, good timing. I always say, like, if I post a Holocaust story on a regular day, if I post a Holocaust story on Yom HaShoah, obviously it will have a smarter engagement. And the third ingredient is my favorite. It's really just mazel. It really just is. It's when the stars and the moon align, but I also always say the rule is there are no rules. I have broken every single rule that otherwise is written in the direct book of what to do. And I always give this example. It's my favorite. My number one most viral video on Facebook, which was viewed like a lot of times. It defies every rule that I can think of. And it was still the biggest to this day. It is a 4-minute long video of an old woman just sitting there speaking in French. It's even subtitled. I mean, the fact that but that's my point, is there are no rules. There is no rush. Everyone has different timelines. Stick with it. Do what you know. Stay on brand. People really come to you for the reliability of just maintain your style as you grow, but just keep with it is really the best advice. And it's not a race. I tell myself that all the time. It's not a race, and I am enjoying the journey. So
amazing. I want to go back to some of your comments about sort of creating a warm invitation to our table, to sort of the non-Jewish community, creating an open environment, as you said. one of my biggest frustrations and criticism of the sort of organized Jewish world is that it's very exclusive, historically and traditionally speaking. Not in every case. I'm speaking generally, of course, right now. But we talked about before we got on this episode, sort of anti-Semitism, and my whole thing is this: anti-Semitism. Part of it is bigotry and racism and discrimination. And the other part of it is us as Jews not having good enough relationships with non-Jewish communities, right? I mean, if we were what I would, if we could be better friends to our non-Jewish family, friends, and communities, well, friends like each other, right? And it's a two-way street. So it's like, to me, it's so obvious that while it won't work in every situation, creating better interpersonal and communal relationships between Jews and non-Jews is one of the great ways to quote unquote fight anti-Semitism, and create more allies, right? Because I think a lot of anti-Semitism happens in settings where there are no Jews at all. And so when you have somebody there who's not a Jew but then can speak up and in favor of Jews, obviously that helps. Do you know what your breakdown is of audience between Jews and non-Jews, just to start this part of that conversation? I'm just curious if you know that.
Certainly. And I'd love to go back to saying, I agree with your sentiment, because I think our relations, we're not meant to be some insular Jews speaking only to Jews society. I mean, I grew up in a modern Orthodox home, and very, very important lesson in my household is that everybody's welcome, so I've never, I've always encountered that inclusiveness in my particular upbringing. I don't feel that hatred is a result of our failure to connect, though. I will say hatred is a disease that has people like you and myself and the rest of us trying to, I like to internalize and problem solve. Okay, how can I fix this? What did I do wrong? And that's what I'm hearing really from you, is what can we do to make this better? I think anti-Semitism often rears its head as a mirror of the times. We're in very difficult times. We're coming off a pandemic. There's a lot of variables that play into not just anti-Semitism. So many different groups of people are feeling just hatred. I actually hate the distinction between the different. I live in New York, so you turn on the news, they tell you exactly which hate group. This is an anti this and anti that and this and that. Can we just call it hate? Because as citizens, we should be appalled by all of them individually. As Jews, I think our relationships with our neighbors and our friends, and to me, family, I consider one of my best friends is not Jewish, and we are sisters. And we do speak on these things very often. And I think that we need to really work to be better friends and neighbors, be better to ourselves. And if we're seeing a gap and we want to, help and fill it, let's come to a productive solution. I'm so done with blaming. Everybody's also gets very political. It's the right, it's the left, it's this. It's the same feeling I have with these just all being hate crimes. I think it's important, obviously, to isolate within the Jewish community, but I think just the nature as society, I think everyone has to get their footing back, and we need to set standards and values that are acceptable and not tolerate bigotry in any form. And that does start with the way you opened and suggested, which is just being open, welcoming, warm to everyone, not insular in the Jewish community, which also takes me back to the page. If I wanted an echo chamber and just to put the things that I understand, that the traditions that my family practices, that's not teaching everybody everything. So in answer to your question, I don't know the divide on, Jewish, not Jewish, but I certainly see it coming in with my own, observation. I get so many wonderful messages of support during anti-Semitic times, support just during a lot of things, people saying how much they love Israel. I so often speak on the difficulties, the anti-Semitism on social media and things like that. But it's so important to say in the same space the support we receive, because it's so meaningful. We can't have that, hate voice really drowning out so much of our friends and neighbors.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of the things that frustrates me is that, listen, Jews have a lot of trauma. We know this going back centuries. I mean, it's real, it's there, it gets passed on to generation after generation, and I don't want to underestimate any of that. That's very, very real, and it affects mental health, it affects spirituality, it affects relationships, and how we look at the world. I also believe that there's so much to celebrate in the Jewish world. The people, obviously, as you do with your page, our history. We've done so many amazing things as a community, within our community, and also to the greater world. We have an amazing state now, which, not to be confused with a perfect state, because there is no such thing, but Israel, by and large, I think is a true miracle, not to be taken for granted, both by the Jewish and greater communities. And, one of the things that I would like to see people look at your page and say is, how do I take more of this balance, right? Like, because you do such a great job of mixing sort of the negative with the positive. And my feeling is, there seems to be this, I don't know if it's a trend or if it's in some internalization, but like, Jews sometimes try to be the victim a lot of the times, and we are victims in a lot of cases, and we have been victims in a lot of cases, but we're also like in a really good position right now, right? Like, and it's not to discount anti-Semitism or the Holocaust or the wars that Israel has to fight, and the terrorism that we're seeing, that I'm seeing living here in Israel firsthand, alongside, the 6, 7, 8 million Israelis. But like, we're still in a damn good position, and like, shouldn't we celebrate that more than we do? I mean, to me, that it feels like we're not doing ourselves service when we predominantly focus on sort of the negative aspects of what it means to be Jewish and do Jewish.
Yeah, no, I think you bring a very good point. I could best align it, last week and the last few weeks, there's unfortunately been a few incidents in Israel, terror related. Now, the one that gets headline coverage is when there's an actual incident, and of course, and then there was what happened in Toccoa, where a crisis was averted by by a very watchful citizen. People seem to respond more, human nature, nothing, just reality. It's human nature to respond when you see the negative. It's the We have been victims to many generations of terrible things as Jews, but I agree, we don't victimize ourselves. We are often rebuilders. But we resonate. It's sort of like it's our wake up. It's sort of like our panic mode button. Like, this is what our fathers told us about, generations out of Egypt or whatever it is, every generation. So when something happens to attack all of us, it doesn't matter if it's Israeli, American, or Australian, or whatever walk of life. If you're Jewish, this is who they're coming after. I mean, you said you're dealing with things over there in Israel. I'm over here in New York too, and it's when my friends in Israel are calling to check on me when they hear of an incident that happens on the subway here, I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I think that we strengthen as a family. We bond when difficult things arise, and we're like, okay, it's sort of like we've been sort of told that this is an expectation within our lives, and we're sort of mentally turned on to prepare for it. With Humans of Judaism and with outlining things, it's so funny that I call it a positive page, especially when I'm sharing Holocaust survivor stories and different trials and tribulations within our community. I think one of the successes with Judaism is often that we lead with love. If I'm telling a story of a Holocaust survivor who passed away, it's not to cry of their death, on their death. It's really to celebrate in their survival and their life and their legacy and the thing, the legacy they left behind. And I think that when you look at the different sort of tone and energy on social media, very often it's very aggressive. Even things that are anti-Israel they're anti-Israel. They're not even for anything. It's just always anti-Israel. And I find that, on humans, I really just try to do pro whatever the message is. It's not meant to be anti. And I think that's the energy. And when I love seeing up and comers and established pages popping up that are supportive of the community, or different niche spots. I always come across some of the funniest Twitter pages that you just revel in the brilliance. And I hope more and more creators continue to come out to do work for the community, for all the different sort of areas that there is to fill, so that we can just all support each other. There's so much room for everybody. So it's a good space.
Tell me a little bit about your vision, what you're hoping to accomplish over the next 3, 5, 10 years with Humans of Judaism.
I guess in my day-to-day, I still have that same like singular forecast, but I do have some ideas, and I am working on things. I feel that the pandemic time period was such a fascinating time as a creator, sort of navigating out there. So I'm just feeling like now more things are coming up to plan. I hope to be in Israel this summer. Just different events are now, everybody's saying together again, I think is like the constant hashtag for everybody's new events. So I feel as things are emerging, that's going to allow me to map out a more steady next couple of years. I can tell you singularly, my number one hope is to just continue to grow and expand, and really just share the best of who we are as a community, the best that I can. So I'm hoping for that. But I will tell you, the timing of this interview is interesting, because I'm just remembering that we're right in between such interesting times on the calendar. We're right in between Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaTzmaut, and then we're coming up on Jerusalem Day. And when I think of Jerusalem Day this year, it's been an interesting reminder, because last year, Jerusalem Day was a very difficult time, specifically, I'm sure, for a lot of Jewish creators. Maybe their ears perked when I said this, but for me, that was the start to some really, really, really aggressive online anti-Semitism and different things that were affecting pages, that were, I remember just so many different creators got together, we were talking about it and things like that. So what I'd like to do in the future, to answer your question, is really try to assist and aid and figure out some solutions to this horrendously growing trend. We talk about anti-Semitism. We said, you're in Israel, I'm in New York. We certainly have seen our fair share of horrific behavior on the ground, violence and physical, etc. But I don't think people talk about enough how much, admins and the average Joe who just is proud to be a Jew, how much we all face attacked. I think everyone thinks if they could just delete it or block it, it sort of goes away. And hopefully some point it will, but it's something that moving forward, I hope to be able to address and provide some sort of resolve.
To your credit, I think you've already been addressing it, even if it hasn't been sort of strategic or calculated. I mean, I've always been a proponent of, human-centric storytelling, right? Humanizing, connecting those interpersonal heartstrings. It's hard to hate somebody when you know their story, and that you can connect with them and say, oh, I can see a little bit of myself in you. And I think you've done a fantastic job of doing that with Humans of Judaism. I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah.
And it was great to talk to you, Nikki.
Oh, likewise. Thank you for having me.